Greetings. Thanks, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us on today's webcast. My name is Dina Evans, and I am the Senior Manager of Global Events here at LookingGlass Cyber Solutions. And I am very excited to introduce today's presentation, which is Through the LookingGlass, what we learned from major cybersecurity events in 2017. Our presenters for today's webcast are the fantastic LookingGlass duo of Eric Olson, who is our VP of Intelligence Operations, and James Carnall, the VP of Customer Support. And just a few quick notes before we get started with our webcast, a few quick housekeeping notes for the BrightTalk platform. Want to call attention to the chat screen window for our audience. If you have any questions, feel free to submit those to our presenters through that window. We'll be addressing all the questions at the end of the presentation during the Q&A section. If for some reason we happen to run out of time, can't get through all the questions, feel free to keep submitting them. We'll make sure to follow up with you directly after the presentation. And one quick note as well, any questions that you do submit, those are viewed directly from us on the presenter side. They're not viewed by the audience. So if there's anything that you want just direct feedback on afterwards for us to address one-on-one, feel free to submit that and we'll make sure to contact you. There's also some attachments and links in that attachments and links section, so peruse that at your convenience. And then lastly, and very importantly, if you would like to obtain your 1 hour of CPE credit toward your professional certification for today's webinar, make sure that you can send it to us. If you didn't already do it when you signed up for today's webinar, you can send me your membership number through the chat screen. BrightTalk automatically populates who that came from, so I can track that and we'll make sure to get it all submitted. But that pretty much takes care of the good housekeeping stuff. And so now, without any further delay, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our great presenters. So James, take it away.
Thank you very much, Dina. Appreciate that. Welcome, everybody. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Yes, so as Dina said, James Carnall here with LookingGlass. I'm here with Eric Olson, and we'll be walking through a little bit of a reflection today on some items in 2017, as well as moving you forward into some comments for 2018.
Good afternoon, everyone. Eric Olson here. I'm happy to be here as well. And we are going to blast in hopefully an entertaining and concise but useful way through some of the, I don't know if you call them highlights or lowlights. A lot of the security issues from 2017 were not good news.
Yes.
But we'll see what we can learn from that and then do a little crystal ball gazing for the coming year.
So we want to give you the flight plan of today's flight. So again, if you're going to join us, as they do with any plane, this is your chance to get off the aircraft before we leave. We want to go through some of the signposts so you know what we're talking about today. So we want to focus on what happened and some of the major activities of the past year, what worked, what didn't in 2017, and what's coming. So a look at 2018. And as always, we want to leave you with a couple of takeaways, some action items that you can take away. And at the end of this, walk up the hall and start talking to people and get some things going today.
Yeah, we always feel that if we don't give you at least one handful of fingers you can tick off of something you can just take away and do right away to make a small difference in your organizational security posture and or the world, then we haven't done our job. So even on low or no dollar budgets, there'll be a few things you can walk away with in the next hour to take from this as actual concrete things beyond our, again, hopefully entertaining look back and look forward.
Let's hope so. All right. Let's go. All right, so let's start with passwords.
They still suck.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I love it.
Okay, for those of you.
Did I say that out loud?
You did.
Oh.
James just outed my password. So it turns out, for those of you who get the Spaceball reference, it turns out that LookingGlass did a review of billions of compromised account credentials that we have captured in the dark web, underground forums, hacker marketplaces, and so on over the last year or so. And when you look at billions, with a B, of compromised account credentials, you find that, in fact, the most popular passwords are still unbearably, hilariously terrible. And no kidding, in addition to password, which is most people's first guess, the #1 password in use today, based on a very large billion-plus record sample set, is, James?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yes, so we're going to talk about the coming year in a little while. There is some hope for user authentication and identity management, but the user-selected password clearly is not it.
So first action, if you look at the list there on the slide, if any one of those is your password, please go and change it.
Please go and change it. That is not actually on our hit list, but that's a lucky strike extra.
Yeah. But again, to say, this is still number one problem. It's still not, it doesn't matter how many times we say it, people are still not doing it. They're not managing this well. They're overwhelmed. They've got too many things to log into at work, at home, on their phone, and they keep repeating the same passwords, or they try and keep it simple. We're still not seeing the growth here we need to.
Absolutely, and to set the kidding aside for just a moment, whether it's the use of a dynamic password manager app on your smartphone, or whether it is simply tiering the websites that you visit into sensitive, critical, banking, financial, and other, etc., for heaven's sake, don't recycle your passwords across these websites, because we can tell you from seeing the current record holder, when we do our analysis of compromised credentials for our clients as part of our attack surface analysis offering, what we see is that even up to and including the board and executive suite, password recycling is rampant. So at least do yourself a favor, tier those websites and access, and the ones that are really sensitive, do something different.
Very good point. Thank you. All right, so phishing still works.
Yep. If passwords still stink, phishing is still the easiest way to make money.
It's a favorite pastime. What can you say?
So what's new in 2017 other than it still works and it's still happening? Two of the biggest things that I think we want to draw attention to are these. First, in the early days of the consumer-oriented web, when I actually worked here, I've been in some form of this job since dinosaurs roamed the earth. Lookalike, typo squat, and character reversal domain names were considered a brand issue and a trademark issue.
Right.
What we have seen, of course, over time is that both consumer phishing of your customers and enterprise spear phishing of your employees or particular job functions are still largely and best accomplished, and there are studies that show this, through weaponizing lookalike domain names, because only the most careful observer will spot them in an email.
Yep.
So we'll talk a lot about weaponized domains because they are a foundational underpinning of a lot of the problems that we've seen. The other thing that has continued, really accelerated a trend from 2016, is phishing has moved far beyond not just financial websites, and other cloud-based services, Gmail, iTunes, and the like. But at this point, there are ways to monetize almost any type of login data, if only because it gives the attacker insight into information they may be able to use to get something else out of you.
So again, we've got a bigger plan for the information I collect. Before, I wanted your credit card number, I wanted your bank account number. Now what I want is to get access to an email account or Outlook or something like that so I can watch and potentially steal other information that gives me more money or something else.
Bigger fish to fry, as they say.
All right. And patching still matters. Whoa, what a year, huh?
What a year. So I'm sure those of you out there who have picked up even a mainstream newspaper have probably heard about WannaCry, Petya, not Petya, so to differentiate it from Petya, etc. These were extremely damaging and nasty malware campaigns, widespread malware campaigns in 2017. And one of the key things that they had in common was they were enabled essentially by outdated systems that had not been kept up with the latest patches and security updates. Now, I will say, and James may have an opinion here too, I am not without sympathy for those whose job, why don't you patch your systems? If you look at any large organization, the number of applications that are running, the number of operating systems that are running, the number of patches that are required and the vulnerabilities that are exposed through any scan or pen test on any given day pose enormous challenges to the small number of people or fingers that are trying to keep up with it. Right. And I'll also say that sometimes you have an incompatibility where...
which is a big issue,
right? It's a huge issue.
You can't update the system and then you have your critical software not operate or bring your system down because of the update. So,
absolutely.
But that takes time to test that.
So we are not we are not making light of the complexity or difficulty that a robust patch management program requires. But at the end of the day, older systems and known vulnerabilities can and will be exploited.
And of course, I think the fraudsters, hackers, are watching these releases and engineering things even after the fact, right? Because they know the window of time from the release of the patch and people actually doing the patch could be a number of weeks, so they can essentially make a big impact in that period of time. It's worth their while developing that kit.
Absolutely. What's sort of depressing is sometimes in our attack surface analysis program, customers will sometimes have us look at some of their critical vendors rather than themselves, and we'll often see vulnerabilities that were on the OWASP top 10 list from 2014, and a few of them were on the 2010 version of the same list that comes out every couple of years. So even the most well-known flaws often go unaddressed for months or even years.
So again, a big impact because of that issue.
Absolutely.
Right. All right, so ransomware has exploded, right? Typically started as more of a way to generate income, money, right? If I'm a fraudster, I want to lock up your system and get some sort of income from that, send a money order to Western Union, but it's moved quite a bit since then.
Absolutely. A couple of things have happened. First of all, most of the ransom demands have moved to cryptocurrencies. It started with Bitcoin. When it became apparent in the newspaper that it's not quite as anonymous or untraceable as one might believe, they moved to other cryptocurrencies, which we'll touch on. But a couple of other really important things happened in the ransomware world. The first is, for the first year or so that this was really on the public or industry radar, the prescription was make sure you take backups, make sure you can restore from backup and so forth, protect your data. Not surprisingly, in the everlasting arms race, the bad guys said, well, our counter to that is to design lockup software or encryption ransomware that seeks out and locks up or destroys the backup.
So if you have a network connected or a constantly connected backup system, of course you can lock that at the same time.
You can indeed.
Right.
Ironically, the more advanced we get technologically, James and I like to joke that the further we start looking back fondly on the Stone Age. So who's for take backup carried to carried out in a briefcase every night.
Right.
The other thing that I think is worth mentioning about the WannaCry and Petya and so on, the ransomware campaigns that we saw, some of them targeted not just indiscriminately, but in some cases intentionally, just really terrible targets. You know, the National Health System in the UK, for example, we saw hospitals having to cancel surgeries because their systems were offline. We saw life and death matters, and that speaks both to a certain ruthlessness on the part of the actors, but of course, if I am utterly ruthless, who better to blackmail than someone who literally can't turn the hospital on without paying me my Bitcoin?
And some of it's just destructive behavior. It's anarchy, right? They don't actually want the financial. We saw in some of this, the level of sophistication for getting the money wasn't really there because that wasn't really their goal. It was masqueraded that way. Really what I want to do is lock up and create destruction.
Absolutely. As I think it was the Batman film, one of the Batman films, you know, some people just want to watch the world burn. Some of them, there was never a ransom demand made. They simply tore through and left wreckage in their wake.
Right. Very good. All right, so you mentioned this a little bit. Obviously, Bitcoin exploded this year. Of course, today, you're probably licking your wounds a little bit if you're looking at the price, but you know, this blew up. It's really went mainstream in a way.
What's interesting is that this, you know, made-up internet money for drug dealers and pedophiles went absolutely mainstream. The number of people interested in it and the ease with which the average Joe could acquire Bitcoin and then other cryptocurrencies led its value to explode, which made it a much bigger target for scam and fraud and so forth. What's interesting, unless you were smart and lucky enough to have bought Bitcoin a year or more ago, what's more interesting to us from a cybersecurity standpoint is a couple of things that happened as a result. First, because Bitcoin, kind of like my nieces and nephews tell me about Facebook. Oh, that's where old people go. No one under 20 uses that anymore, right? So Bitcoin is no longer for the cool kids. It's also, as we've discussed, not as anonymous as some people were led to believe, and there have been many, many high-profile arrests made despite the use of Bitcoin, the result being that the true underground market has already sought out and worked to develop alternatives such as Darkcoin and Monero. The other thing that happened as a result of that exploding value is it became worth it to pursue acquisition of cryptocurrency. So exchanges have been targeted, Bitcoin wallet software has been targeted, and because problems beget new problems,
right.
For those who don't know, other than buying Bitcoin or getting paid for services in Bitcoin, the best way to acquire Bitcoin or crypto coin wealth is to, quote, mine it.
Yep.
You create new coins out of thin air through a computationally intensive process called mining. That takes enormous computing power, which you either have to pay for or you have to hijack. The point being that has led to a whole new use case for botnets.
Right.
And the more expensive Bitcoin becomes, the more motivating it is to hijack 100,000 computers to mine some Bitcoin.
Well, it's like taking oil out of the ground, right? Once it gets to a certain price point, it makes sense to do
sense.
it, right? To invest in it. And that becomes why you want to hack people's systems, because you want to use their systems to mine this and what have you.
Absolutely. The higher it goes, the more crime it will engender.
And I think the speed of the transaction was another thing with Bitcoin too, right? Is they were finding they couldn't use it as efficiently as they wanted to or move it around as quickly. So.
It's a victim of its own success.
Yeah. All right. So, I mean, again, wire, essentially business email compromise scams, wire transfer for, scams, W-2 scams. This was a huge year for all of those types of things. Again, this is an education. It is a type of exploit that's been out there for a while. I mean, in regards to a human exploit, we've been socially engineering people into falling for these types of emails, typically not detected at the firewall because I'm not getting you to click on a link and I'm not asking you to fill out any forms on a website. I'm actually sending you an email as the CEO or somebody within the HR or the finance group saying, hey, can you send me all the W-2s for every employee in the company or all the financial data for all the employees? Right?
Yeah, it's a great point. And by the way, when he says we've been doing this, you don't mean you and I, right?
No.
Okay. So this was absolutely a breakout year for the business email compromise. That is not a malicious link or poisoned attachment, but an actual social engineering attack, meaning I manipulate the user into physically taking an action for me. Send me all the W-2s, I need them for year-end payroll, or wire money to this imaginary vendor.
I'm a vendor, you're right.
Yeah.
I think 44 million was one of the big ones that we saw.
That's right, and we've seen at least a couple of CEOs lose their jobs over falling victim to these sorts of things. There are actually, this slide I'm going to take an extra minute on because there are 4 things I think are kind of breakout matters here. Very quickly, because we do have a lot of material to cover. First, again, weaponizing lookalike and character substitution and homograph domains. Second, the attackers are using the social media information of the people being targeted. So, for example, the CEO is on a trip to Copenhagen, and he tweets about being on his trip to Copenhagen, and the attacker sets up a fake domain with an O for a 0 for an O or whatever. They email the accounting department, and they say, I'm in Copenhagen meeting with this vendor that is actually a vendor, and they haven't been paid, and the CEO is yelling at me, quick, wire money, etc. So they're using near real-time intelligence to power a convincing campaign. Third, which I'm going to mention, is we said for a long time, one of the best counters to this is if you get a request that is any way suspicious for sending funds or something like that, get up out of your chair, pick up the phone, walk down, and ask about it, to which the fraudsters have responded. Right, James? So what do they do?
So now they say this is part of a merger and acquisition or something top secret, and they say, please don't talk to anybody, don't call anyone. Right? So they've already got ahead and changed the messaging so you don't do those things that we're telling you to do.
Right. So if I'm Joe, the accounting clerk, I've now got a terrible choice. I either do what the CEO says and wire the money to some Billy Bob in Romania, or I have to violate the request for silence, or I, the accounting clerk, have to march up 7 floors, knock on the CEO's door and say, this is real, which probably terrifies me. None of these are good options for me as the accounting clerk.
No. And these work because it's based on authority, right? An authority figure telling somebody what to do. So it's business culture and business process. And if you don't have the culture and the process fixed so you don't fall for this, it will work. Right?
Absolutely.
So.
All right. Next big theme. Really big theme.
Oh, yes. The Internet of Things.
The Internet of Things. So
it's everywhere.
By 2022, I think most of the Gartner and Cisco and everybody estimates are something like there will be 5 devices connected to the Internet for every human on the planet.
That's right. There's already more than human beings, right? So
Absolutely.
we're already past that. But the key thing is it is everywhere. And therefore, they know where it is, they know what the, essentially vulnerabilities are, what the exploits are, and you may have 15 of these in your house if you've got DOTS and Siri and all these sorts of things, and Alexa and all these different types of devices. Right? After
the past holiday season, your kid probably has 2 internet-connected drones, an Alexa in their room, and a racing car that talks to the Internet, not to mention the fridge and the coffee pot.
Right.
Here, and we chose this screenshot to make the point quickly because we got to keep going. I love this headline from Ars Technica. Internet of Things security is hilariously broken. Not just broken, but broken to the point of funny. And what they mean is most of these little widgets and devices run on very simple, in many cases, very old, simple operating systems that no one has given a moment's thought to security. And there are lots of demonstration hacks out there to prove the point.
It's not easy to update them. They can be bricked, right? I mean, you essentially can throw them away after a week.
And what we saw, for example, with the Reaper botnet is that even these extremely simplistic, quote, dumb devices can be weaponized in huge numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So
another thing that was big is, essentially the impact of a breach. Right? So again, the notification laws going into place, policies that the governments are putting in place to try and protect us from, essentially security problems and breaches and hacks and you name it.
Yeah, so regulation, oversight, compliance, and notification all went completely vertical this year. And if we may say so, industry, we collectively have probably earned some of that.
Oh my goodness! I mean, over half of the American country, nation, population, 145 million Americans affected by Equifax.
A single breach.
Yeah, that's not counting the Canadians and the British that were affected by that as well, right? We've got Yahoo and had to drop their sales price, 350 million. So Verizon can pick them up because of the breach that they had. Oh, and not some people, by the way, every user of Yahoo.
So imagine you're the one negotiating an acquisition for your company and you go, okay, well, I guess I can't hold out on this anymore. We had a data breach and some of our user data was lost. By some, I mean all. Yeah. All of it. We lost all of it.
Well, you break it into some, well, more than some.
Let's just call it all.
Yeah, all. Let's just call it all.
Right. To James' point, that was a $350 million hit to the shareholders.
Yeah, I mean, huge. And then, of course, the beautiful one, Uber, right? Pay $100,000, right, and ransom, so they don't release the fact that they've stolen, was it the 57 million drivers, all their personal information, and then it comes out a year later anyway. How do you look?
Right. So we've got 3 problems here. Uber got hacked big time. Mm-hmm. Uber paid hush money to not tell anybody they got hacked big time. Then it came out a year later anyway. Mm-hmm. That's 3 separate problems for shareholders, investors, management team, the employees, the drivers, and their customers.
Yeah, and Yahoo didn't tell anyone either. So do you think maybe the notification policy might be a good one?
So I guess what I'm saying is, to some degree, all that onerous regulation that business, including us, likes to complain about, some of it we may have earned in spades.
Right, yeah.
All right.
All right, so you want to talk about some of the things that worked this year, Eric. So
yeah. Some things really did work. There's been an enormous growth in cybersecurity education and training programs, both on the job, vocational, and at the university level, which is terrific. The problem is there's a long lag time, and we still need to do more.
Yep, lots of university programs and college programs focusing on this to try and give us the people to essentially have the workers of the future, right, working on these types of problems.
Absolutely.
Yep. So we have user safety training.
Yep.
Right?
Safety training. as much as we need to educate the cyber workers, we've talked already in the last 20 minutes about how many of these things are driven by victimizing the average employee.
Right.
And awareness training on a bang-for-buck level, a suspicious user is probably as good as a new firewall.
Well, and it's working, right? Because our
Absolutely.
grandmothers now know what phishing are and spam, right?
Yep.
So
Finally.
And so a broad level of awareness, right? So we've got the Cyber Awareness Month, we've got, placards and posters and, be aware,
Yeah.
see something, report something.
And I think the fact that this is filtered upward is absolutely critical. I don't envy the chief information security officers of the world and we work with many of them who have pounded their fist on the table for years saying, the board won't let me into the room. I don't get a seat at the table. They're not listening. And now they come to us and they go, oh my gosh, the board wants to talk to me.
Right.
What do I
Be
say?
careful what you wish for.
Exactly.
Right.
So when CEOs start losing their jobs, when you see $350 million in shareholder value evaporate, suddenly the people at the very, very, very top care.
They certainly do.
That's probably a good thing in the big picture.
Yeah. And two-factor authentication is something that we've seen an explosion of, right? So the banks were first to sort of kick this off. Now we've seen it adopted by social media platforms and other app providers. Anybody who has a program or app now tends to offer this or can roll it out.
They used to say, the consumer hates the extra clicks, they'll never put up with this. Then the consumer got punked 100 times in 16 months, and suddenly the consumers are on board with, please send me a text when I try to wire transfer money to Romania, right?
Well, and most people have two phones on them at all times, or a device, so they can get that little code, and so it works.
Yep.
Third-party risk, right? We know our partners or the people we work with have some level of risk to share as we outsource maybe our storage or our hosting. Our HR systems, other things like that. So we're starting to see people look outside the firewall and start to say, hey, I need to know what your policies and procedures are and how to control that.
Absolutely. We had a white paper here at LookingGlass that said, if I remember correctly, something like 2/3 of all breaches actually start in the supply chain, meaning your vendors, your partners, the people who have access to reach into your systems are in many cases more of a risk than the buttoned-up large enterprise. In fact, we work with enterprises that have some of the best security we've ever seen, and James and I have 40-odd years of doing this between us. The problem is that they are, in some cases, dependent on 9-person mom-and-pop shops for absolutely critical outsourcing of specific processes.
So, and the last one I think that we're really proud of is that assume that you already are breached in some way, right? Go in with the assumption that I've got to find the areas where I may have already been compromised.
Absolutely. Those of you who know the Eric and James Comedy Hour here, we've done a series of webinars over the years on buzzword bingo, and threat hunting is really just this year's buzzword for, okay, we finally heard you. You're right. We should assume someone is already in. How do we find the tick on the dog and dig it out? Yeah. And that is something that buzzword in the industry for this year, it actually reflects a change in mindset that we have been advocating for a long time.
So congratulations. Now let's get to the not so good, right? What didn't work? Wireless protocol. So we've got the crack that happened this year, right? So we had
Wi-Fi crack, Blueborn.
Right, the Bluetooth. Yep. So a whole bunch of vulnerabilities, systems that we leave on in our phones and our computers. We walk around different facilities. We connect to whatever's around us. I mean, it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere, right? We need connections for our game to work now. So we want to be online all the time. The car we buy has multiple connections in it, right?
We're about to be driving rolling PlayStations.
Exactly.
Which is closely related to one we touched on before. I would say the window is nearly closed. IoT devices run on a set of protocols and operating systems that are hopelessly unattended from a security standpoint, and that ship in many ways has sailed. Let's hope that some backward compatible solution makes itself known, because getting in at the front end and putting security in,
well, the technology
we've missed the window.
Yeah, the technology you put in your smart house may not be so smart, right?
Exactly.
So workforce development, this is a big one. There's a massive shortfall, and it's projected to go on for some time, where we don't have the expertise to keep us safe and keep us secure, from manufacturing to general workers to cybersecurity experts, analysts, we've got a steep climb. Now, it's great. We credited the programs and the academia for getting there, but again, we don't have enough people.
No, and just in the last few years, to go from a general environment with higher than we'd like unemployment to, I think, 4%, which is essentially an economist's definition of full employment, and to say, yeah, it's great, we've got all these programs, but they're nowhere near where we need to be. This is a national level effort that is required to fill these positions. We joked before this webinar that we have colleagues and acquaintances and clients in the industry who, every time we talk to them, they have a new business card because they're so in demand, they keep changing jobs.
Yes, yep, absolutely right. So vulnerability assessments and effective patch prioritization.
I'll just go back to the WannaCry. This is a perennial pain, and as I said, we are not without sympathy. But if anything, WannaCry was basically an exploit powered by woefully out-of-date Windows machines. Mm-hmm. It's just this was a serious area of pain.
Well, and Microsoft even patched XP. They came back and rolled some of that out to try and
which they stopped supporting years ago.
Yeah, it just shows you the commitment to it. So,
backups and DR. So everyone who is victimized effectively by a piece of ransomware, de facto, right, does not have an effective backup or disaster recovery, at least for that machine or that part of their network. Because if they did, they would say, take your Bitcoin and shove it, wipe the machine, and come up clean. And if they don't, it means they didn't plan for this, which actually brings us to our last point, which is not just incident response, the super nerds who come and clean up the hard drive.
Smoke jumpers, right?
Right. But at a company level, the response to these events has been, depending on the specific case, somewhere between not bad and truly appalling.
Right.
And what that says to us is, forget the technical response, the incident response. The company, there is no communication plan. There is no, we know who to call, we know who's going to speak, we know what they're going to say, we know which lawyers to call, because the first thing you do is lawyer up, right?
Yep. How do we get in touch with the board? How do we brief them?
Absolutely.
How do we communicate with our clients and our customers?
And our shareholders.
Do we deploy some sort of credit monitoring, yes or no? Do we make the clients pay for it? I mean, that was a big one this year.
Absolutely. So that brings us to
the crystal ball.
The woo-woo section of today's webinar. So what do we think is coming? Well, we started off this webinar, I think our second slide was, boy, passwords are really terrible.
Yep.
We are beginning to see the beginning of the end through facial modeling, retina scan, biometrics.
Apple's already done with a thumbprint, and then they moved onto your face, right?
Yep.
So.
And let us make a entirely dependable prediction, which is this is absolutely coming, and it will not be without its occasional embarrassing and, if not hilarious, lumps.
Yes.
There will be some pratfalls in the process of rolling out non-password authentication, but we are wholeheartedly behind it as an absolute must-have for the future.
We need to get away from passwords. We need to move on.
100%.
So AI is really cool, and it's going to save us all, right? Because the computers can step ahead of everything else, and all the exploits, everything's going to be taken care of. We can sit back and drink our coffee and just watch the systems all work, right?
Absolutely. There's only one catch.
What's that?
The bad guys can use the same AI as the
good guys.
And
you mean they can get access to that too?
That's right. And as James and I have discussed for many years, unfortunately, we good guys work for a salary and the bad guys work for all the money they can steal, which at a macro level means generally the bad guys are more motivated and work longer hours and work nights and weekends when we're all home with our families, which means that if you assume that AI is weaponized on both sides, the arms race will continue.
Alexa, can you read this slide? Alexa? Nope. All right. We're going to have digital assistants all over the place, right? This is something that's exploding. Again, they're in our house. They're listening to us all the time.
All the time.
We're going to even let people into our front door to deliver that package so it doesn't get stolen. What could go wrong?
I'm a Luddite. I'm keeping my door locked. But yes, the Alexa, the Siri in your phone, the Cortana, the Google Assistant, right? These things will become absolutely ubiquitous as new products roll out. You'll be able to talk to everything in another year. And of course, that's awesome from a convenience standpoint, but we will all pay a price in privacy, which essentially doesn't exist at this point anyway, and security, which is a battle we continue to fight.
Well, and if it's controlling your lights, your air conditioning, your TV, you're not going to be able to do much when they brick it and you can't get access to it, right?
Absolutely.
So all those things need bandwidth.
Yes.
A lot of internet access, right?
Lots of devices and big fat pipes, which, just as a predictable after effect of those important and valuable trends that I applaud as a consumer, but the result will be, I mean, a year or so ago, during the Hong Kong protests, right, we were all agog at the 400 gigabit per second DDoS attacks, and we thought, we've never seen anything like that.
Amazing.
Well, now when you combine the number of internet-connected devices per child, per household, et cetera, exploding, and fiber optic, HD movie download in 6 seconds type of bandwidth in the home, forget the enterprise. One of the things I can absolutely predict and feel very comfortable about is that next year, terabit per second DDoS is just going to be de rigueur. It's going to be a routine occurrence.
Well, and the bandwidth on the phones, too, are such where your car and your cell phone alone could do a reasonable attack, right?
Yes, it used to be that phones were too small and too underpowered to participate in botnets effectively. If you look at the predictions for 5G, right, it's going to be faster than anything you or I ever experienced until 6 months ago, and it'll be on our phones.
And there's a lot more of those.
And there's a lot more of those.
Autonomous vehicles, right? So again, no steering wheel, no pedal.
So there's one problem with the car you can't take back on manual control because there's no steering wheel, and that is, if you get it to stop,
how do you get it to go again, right? And again, there's sort of examples of these stickers that look like a bicycle to the programmer, right? So they have to send a technician out. So there's going to be a lot of tow truck drivers making a lot of money out of this year.
And a lot of teenagers having a lot of fun figuring out how to stop your Waymo car in the middle of the expressway.
With a sticker, right?
Yes. Yes.
And make it a scratch and sniff. It'll sell better. Smells like diesel. All right. So what else? Oh, and then everything else.
What else will be hacked?
Right.
So as we increasingly incorporate wearables, smart home devices, medical implants, etc., into our lives, you can already see the drops of water that will become the flood in the next year.
Well, they're getting cheaper, and people are handing these down to their kids or what have you. So again, there's no way to update the operating systems of these, and so again, we're going to end up with the old versions and middle versions and new versions, and they're going to be so cheap, everybody's going to have them.
That's right.
We're going to see, somebody tracking your heart rate that you don't want, or hacking into some other system. I mean, the exposure is amazing, isn't it?
It is, especially, forget security for a moment, just thinking a little bigger, everything from criminal proceedings to divorce filings, right? What can be discoverable? What can be subpoenaed? I want to know what your Fitbit said at that moment. And
well, we're already using the metadata from cars in lawsuits, right, to convict people. So now we'll use your wearable to testify against you.
It's going to be interesting.
So the big news of the year, right? The crack of the egg was around politics and campaigns and voting and things like that globally. This was a big wake-up call for people.
Absolutely. Lest those of you listening think that this was limited to or focused on, say, the American election of 2016. There was active election hacking and manipulation activity, both from the so-called fake news, psyops, information war, as well as direct attacks, spear phishing, data exfiltration, etc. It was not just here. It happened before the British parliamentary elections. It happened before the French elections. And interestingly, I was not aware of this myself until I started researching today's presentation. This is rampant throughout Latin America. In fact, a single hacker has come forward and spoken openly in the press with journalists about how for many years now he has essentially made his life's work rigging and hacking Latin American elections all through the continent.
Right. So again, it's not that this hasn't happened in little bits here and there. In fact, it's happened so publicly and so much within 1 year.
Absolutely. And so, my feeling is that this is the new Cold War. This is the new geopolitical non-shooting battle space. Right. It's not just cyber war and electrical grids and overspinning the centrifuges, right? It's manipulating the public, it's manipulating opinion, it's manipulating the democratic process.
Yeah. Wow.
That's
all right.
The biggest of big stories.
So let's bring it down, and let's
Okay.
feed everybody with some information they can walk down the hall, as we said, and take action on right away. You may not have, $1 million in the bank or in the budget, right? The budget's already closed. You're already living within the year. It's already started. Sorry to say that, people. So what can I do right now that has lower impact on my budget but a big impact on my security profile?
Yeah, in preparation for today's discussion, James and I discussed literally dozens of things we might wish to recommend, from threat hunting teams to log analyzers to
lots of great tools out there.
Amazing tools and algorithms and AI and machine learning and all kinds of great stuff. But the bottom line is, in many organizations, as James said, your budgets may be locked. There may or may not be an appreciation or an appetite for some of those security things. So what we wanted to close with was, can we give you, a handful of takeaways to walk down the hall with today that are easily within reach, more or less irrespective of your budget. These are low to no dollar things you can do right now. And the first thing on the list,
monitoring your domains, right?
Monitoring domain registrations for lookalikes to your brand and your website. It's key to spear phishing. It's key to consumer phishing. It's key to getting, attachments and poisoned links through.
Social engineering. They're all using this tactic. It works.
It absolutely. In fact, it's working better than ever.
Yeah.
There are services, including ours, but there are many out there. Find a way to monitor for domain registrations that imitate or mimic your brands or websites, and proactively buy the ones you can think of and immediately act on the ones that you see.
Very good. And so the next one, again, was one that we have credited in this presentation with getting better, but it needs to keep going. We need to see the momentum, which is cyber awareness, anti-phishing training, social engineering, educating people on how to interact. How do you determine whether the domain you just said is legitimate or not, or the website is? How do we teach people to do these things? That should be very basic. Absolutely.
From understanding how to spot the domain name in a gobbledygook URL to identifying the smell funny elements of a suspicious message. Cyber safety awareness or phishing awareness training. There are providers out there. We have computer-based training programs from free to Cadillac, gold standard end of the spectrum. But anything is better than nothing. Educate your employees, educate your users constantly. Awareness, as I said, a suspicious user is a better defense than a new firewall and a heck of a lot cheaper. Many of these learning management systems are online now. This can be done for small numbers of dollars per year. It's definitely worth looking at.
Well, and the young employees that are coming into the organization out of university are very technically savvy anyway, so it's not intimidating for them to learn these things.
Right, but they're also the ones most likely to connect to everything and share with everyone.
Hence the education part. Right?
Absolutely.
So, and then we're talking about publicly accessible network assets, right? This is another one we think is relatively easy in regards to the scope of work here.
It's easy for your adversaries. Right? Identify what network assets. These are your websites, your domains, your IP ranges that belong to your organization. Do what the adversary would do. Go to Shodan, go to Census, look up what you have out there that's outward facing and what anybody with a keyboard can find about what's vulnerable, what's not patched. Spend a few dollars on an off-the-shelf service or a scanner piece of software. Run a simple application vulnerability scan. Run a network vulnerability scan on your outward-facing elements that are visible to the bad guys. If you don't know how to do this, Google it. Watch it on YouTube. This is something that even a non-technical person can do or can engage a vendor to do at very low cost.
And this is one we discussed, the next one, because it's very important, right? This whole concept of a plan. Right?
Absolutely.
I mean, if the worst happens, right, you've got to go through and train for that. So you need to go through and do some internal exercises so you understand what your communication plan, who calls what, who does what, who spends what, who to go to, all these things. It's all a plan.
Yep. In the industry, you may hear people refer to this as wargaming or a tabletop exercise. Call it what you like. The bottom line is this. Look within your own organization and say, what are the worst things that could happen? If a crypto attack, a ransomware attack locked up which database, which website, which system, how would you respond?
Yep.
And if it were a breach, if data were actually exfiltrated, posted, sold, or given to the New York Times, what would that look like?
Right.
Then say, when that happens, what would we do? I use the analogy of the Defense Department. You know, I don't know, but I believe strongly that somewhere in a drawer there is a notebook, a binder for every bizarre eventuality, from the Venezuelans invade Alaska to aliens land on the White House lawn. Someone has written a procedure for the what's the worst that could happen.
Yep.
Don't wait till the building is on fire to figure out where the garden hose is.
Well, and there's a good reason why they put it in a folder too. If your computer's locked up, you can't find it, right?
Put it on paper on a shelf.
Exactly, right. But again, it's one of these things from the top down, and you can use the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of your risk, you use that. Or use what's in the press. A lot of companies are actually saying, hey, let's use this scenario that was just published as the premise.
Yeah.
For us
what if this happened to us? Absolutely.
Right.
And finally, go a step further. You may not have a budget for a team of threat hunters and a bunch of fancy cyber tools from a bunch of high-end vendors, but just start mentally. If I assume I've been compromised in any way that I actually care about, you know, if I get copies of the invoices for the coffee cups, I don't really care. But if I assume compromise, is there anything in my current portfolio, tools, logs, skill sets, people, the comp sci undergraduate who's doing their summer internship and wants to impress us, is there anything I have in my existing budget or portfolio that might allow me to say, if I were already owned, where might I look for evidence and how might I do it? And while there are lots of high-end solutions and services and tools for this, and we're one of the vendors that likes to provide them, look within what you have to work with and start with the art of the possible. Assume compromise and say, is there anything I could do to see if I see any footprints in the mud?
All right, very good. So with that and those tips there, we will now move over to a question and answer section. So Dina, I think we're opening up for that now. Thank you.
Yeah, James, I think we've got a couple that have come in. Here's one in particular. It says, when making a password, what matters more in terms of security, the length of the password or the complexity of it? What do you think?
Well, so most organizations have some policy in regards to how long it has to be. That changes and varies, and there's certain characters or symbols you can and can't use. Again, it's a real individual thing. There's not a blanket policy, but I would always go for the most sophisticated password, and 8 characters tends to be the standard. You don't really want to go any less than that unless you need to.
No, and I'll just add that from my chair, and I am not a cryptographer, I am not a mathematician, but I have done some reading. I've seen some things that indicate if you assume that the simplest counter to a password is a brute force or what's called a rainbow table, which essentially reverses the encryption of millions of common passwords or of all the compromised accounts that have already been sold on the dark web. I would say my personal approach, at least, is this. 1, highly unusual passwords, because they are unlikely to have been reversed. And I generally favor very long, sort of phrase-driven passwords. So I could have the world's most complex 8-character password, or I could say, 1, 2, 3, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, exclamation point.
With spaces, if you can.
That's right.
Yeah.
And since quotation is a function, the cumulative, the number of combinations I have to try explodes with the length of the string of characters. I personally favor very long passwords that also meet the special character, uppercase, lowercase requirements. And that's my personal leaning.
And if 2 factors available, definitely.
Absolutely. Get Duo and Google Authenticator on your phone. And a great tip, James, every website, Facebook, Google, Apple, take your pick, your bank, anyone who offers the option of 2-factor authentication, take it. Take it every time.
Yeah, and I think, again, the key thing is that, don't reuse the same password. Even if it's a complex password, don't reuse it in multiple places. That's the biggest problem we're seeing is the reuse of passwords. So,
absolutely.
Again, I wish there was a standard to password use so we could sort of say there's one universal way to do it. But, again, each service does it slightly differently.
Absolutely.
Very good point. Very good point. Okay, here's another one that's come in, gentlemen. Let's see, this one says, if I could get my enterprise users to make one behavior change this year, what should I target?
Ooh, what a good question.
One behavior change.
One behavior change. That actually brings me to a recommendation we didn't put on our 5 things you can do right now slide. So first let me answer the question and then a recommendation that follows from it. I kept harping on the fact that a suspicious user is one of the best defenses, right? So I would say the first behavior change is stop and ask, what happens if this is an attack? What happens if this is a phish before they ever click any link or any attachment? Like, make that the company mantra, get a mascot, hold a pizza party, have everybody think, before I click on a link or an attachment, what if I'm wrong? And the recommendation would be, because we've instituted this here, even in a company where we do this for a living, which is if HR or the Chief Information Security Officer's office or the CTO's office is going to make any request of a broad set of the employees. For example, we will ask you to fill out a survey about how you feel about working here, or everyone please go update your certifications in your company resume, or whatever. Send a note out first from a named individual that people know, like the head of HR or one of the executives, that says, tomorrow we will be sending this message. It is not a phish, because for a number of months here, our management team sent out all kinds of things to the employees, and they couldn't understand why no one was responding. And the answer was, of course, we had trained them to be paranoid.
No, I think that's a very good point there, Eric. And again, just to clarify, right, you have monthly meetings or department meetings. It should be shared at that time that these initiatives are happening internally, so these are not surprises. And just another thing I would say is that I would also piggyback on that is, if you have access to a portal and somebody sends, hey, I want you to link to Box, or I want you to go to this HR system, use that as a prompt to go to the system and log in, and avoid, just as a personal practice, not clicking on links unless it's absolutely necessary.
Absolutely. If your HR stuff is in Workday, if your payroll is in ADP or payroll.com, don't click. Type.
Yeah, they've all got message or to-do lists, so once you get in there, you can easily navigate to whatever the message was or whatever you need to approve, and it's just a good best practice to stay away from.
Absolutely. And typing, to use ADP as the example, I mean, it's 3 characters, right?
Right.
ADP.com, 7 characters.
Right.
Type it yourself,
That's exactly right.
It's the juice is worth the squeeze, as they say.
That's a good one. Gina, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I do. Let's see, there's a couple more. Let's see. Let's go through these. How do you motivate your customers to focus on their cyber exposure on the internet? Unfortunately, people begin to motivate to find and mitigate what is wrong with their company when it's too late.
Well, I think, one of the things that we typically rely on to help educate is we take, like we have here, a lot of the clippings from the press and the media talking about this, because people don't feel that, and typically they're uncomfortable being told what to do. But if you can essentially show them how this vulnerability is out there, or this problem, or this best practice is out there, you can use your peers and you can use what's happening in other industries as an example. So it doesn't happen overnight, right? Because again, a lot of executives, they're so focused on their swim lane, they don't see any of this. So you have to socialize it over time.
Yeah, the interesting thing from my standpoint, so for those who don't know, we actually have a service called Stratus, our Strategic Intelligence Subscription Service, and it provides all of the finished Intel fancy products that you would expect from a dedicated Intel shop,
right,
like LookingGlass. And 10 pages on a campaign, 5 pages on reversing a piece of malware, and 17 pages on some terrible threat actor. All the things you would expect from threat researchers and hotshot analysts. One of the most useful, but in some cases, underappreciated elements of that service is also a hand-curated news feed of stories of cyber goings-on, which is actually produced 24 hours a day in a stream with human review. We cherry-pick the hacks and breaches and stories we think are actually worth knowing about, and a percentage of our clients actually take that news stream and in many cases further curate it, winnow it down, in a couple of cases at least, brand it internally as their own product, and circulate it to a distribution of management, of specific functional roles.
Business leaders, yeah.
So they're not saying, I need money, or I need budget, or I need headcount, or we should do this. They're simply continuously producing this, hey, you should be aware, peer company X was hacked, big company Y had a breach, and regulation Z is coming down the pipe. Because then when the upper floors of the building say, what should we do? They've been hearing about these things for some time, and they know who to go and talk to, which are the security folks who've been sending them.
And if you can share the cost to those businesses post the event, it also helps from a budget point of view.
This cost them $100 million, and that CEO lost their job.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm not being glib. Rather than constantly fear-mongering, simply putting it as non-judgmental education, putting out product to educate internally, maybe a gentler way. It's more Socratic, bringing people around to your point of view.
But again, it goes back to our theme. Education is key at every level.
Every level.
Right. You can never share too much in regards to keeping people safe. So
yeah, make it opt-in if you have to.
Right.
Very good. There's one more. I think we've got a couple more minutes. Let's do this last one before we run out of time. Says, what is the most important thing you can do to protect yourself from cyber attacks in 2018? Probably in line with some of the points that you were just making, but let's go ahead and touch on that.
Well, I guess it depends on what you mean by you. Me as an individual, or, excuse me, yourself as an organization. I'll speak to the individual first, which is become almost monomaniacally paranoid about everything that arrives in your inbox, your messenger.
Of everything. Yep.
And I'm not being facetious. I think the only reason, at least as far as I know, that all my money is still in my bank account and no one's taken out a mortgage in my name that wasn't me, is because I am disciplined about, I watch my accounts, I'm religious about two-factor authentication, regular checkups on all the websites that matter. I'm disciplined about strong and lengthy passwords, that sort of thing.
Okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Dina.
No, go ahead.
And I was just going to say, as an organization, I'd point to some of the things we put on some of the slides, but it really, really depends on management's level of awareness and buy-in. There are organizations where security is a board-level talking point every month, and there are others where the attitude is, put a reserve on the balance sheet, it's cost of doing business, I'm done with security.
Yeah.
What you do depends on where you work.
My only variation on that is that, again, go back to the education. If you're bringing in a new tool for your staff, make sure you educate them. Don't just say, hey, we're doing this. Really educate them on how to use it and what to use, what sort of communication policy, right? Will it send alerts? What will be in the alerts? Really go through that, because most of the hacks that we're seeing, or people falling for these, is because they don't understand what it is, how to work with it, and they fall for it when it comes from a different domain, or I've never seen this message before, but I know we're getting a new HR system, I'll just click on it, right? You need to make sure that you are putting policies in place and you're behaving in a consistent manner, so the employees say, hey, I've never seen this and nobody talked about it, I'm not going to click, I'm going to ask, right? And that's a culture thing. Absolutely.
And I would say, Dina, if I had to boil it down to the first thing, it is actually an organizational, a cultural change toward safety awareness, toward education, toward online training, because you can spend money on all the kit that vendors like us would love to sell you, and if the people aren't bought in to the notion that they are a target, that the company or organization is a target, all the gear in the world will not save you.
Very good stuff. Very good. Gentlemen, thank you so much. We are almost to the top of the hour, so we are going to have to wrap it up. Eric and James, great stuff, entertaining as always. Audience, thank you for listening today. You've had some really good stuff that some of you might want to share. We will put a copy of the recording of today's webcast on our resources page, which is at LookingGlassCyber.com. This last slide has some different ways to get in touch with us if you have any additional questions or want to reach us. But again, thank you to everybody for viewing. It's been a pleasure. Our webinars are the third Wednesday of every month, so look for announcements for our next one. But Eric and James, I really appreciate your time, and thank you for everybody for being here.
Absolute pleasure. Happy New Year. Thank you very much for having us.
Thanks, Dina.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.